Paris, 1764. A young woman named Marie-Jeanne, daughter of a wealthy merchant, sits in her father's library reading a forbidden book. Her hands tremble not from fear of discovery, but from excitement. The book is Denis Diderot's Encyclopedia, and in its pages she discovers something revolutionary. The idea that she possesses reason. Not divine inspiration, not feminine intuition, but reason itself. The same faculty that men claim as their birthright. When her father finds her, he doesn't punish her. Instead, he sits beside her and says something unthinkable for the time. Perhaps you should read more. This small moment, multiplied across 1 million households, across coffee houses in London, salons in Amsterdam, and printing shops in Philadelphia, represents nothing less than a rewiring of human consciousness. We're about to explore how a movement of ideas fundamentally transformed not just how we think, but who we believe we are. The Enlightenment didn't announce itself with trumpets. It crept into European consciousness like dawn breaking over a long night, so gradual that most people didn't realize the world had changed until they looked back and saw only darkness behind them. But make no mistake, what happened between roughly 1650 and 1800 was as profound as the discovery of fire or the invention of agriculture. It was the moment when humanity decided to trust itself. To understand what the Enlightenment changed, we need to grasp what came before. In 1600, the average European lived in a world thick with invisible forces. Demons caused disease, angels intervened in battles, witches spoiled milk and blighted crops. The king ruled by divine right, a golden chain connecting his crown directly to God's throne. Your position in life, whether lord or serf, was ordained before your birth. To question this order wasn't just heresy, it was literally unthinkable, like questioning whether water was wet or fire was hot. Knowledge came from two sources, the Bible and Aristotle, both considered more or less perfect and complete. The idea that you, an ordinary person, could discover new truth through observation. And reason would have seemed as absurd as claiming you could fly by flapping your arms. Then came the cracks in the cosmic egg. In 1543, Copernicus published his theory that the Earth revolved around the Sun, not the other way around. It took decades for this idea to spread, but when it did, it carried an unsettling implication. The ancients were wrong. Aristotle was wrong. If they were wrong about the heavens, what else might they be wrong about? In 1628, William Harvey proved that blood circulated through the body, pumped by the heart, demolishing 1,500 years of medical theory based on Galen. In 1687, Isaac Newton published his Principia Mathematica, revealing that the entire universe operated according to mathematical laws that any educated person could understand. The cosmos wasn't a mystery requiring priests to interpret, it was a clock, elegant and comprehensible. But Newton did something even more revolutionary than his equations. He demonstrated a method: observe, measure, hypothesize, test, revise. This scientific method became a template for approaching not just nature, but everything. If we can understand the orbits of planets through reason, why not the organization of society? Why not justice? Why not happiness itself? Francis Bacon had already articulated this in the early 1600s when he wrote that knowledge is power, and that power should be used to improve human life. This was radical. For millennia, philosophy had been about contemplating eternal truths, not making life better. Bacon essentially said, truth should be useful. We should study nature not to admire God's handiwork, but to bend it to human purposes. This sounds obvious now. In 1620, it was revolutionary. René Descartes took this further. Sitting in a room in Holland in 1619, he decided to doubt everything he could possibly doubt. Could he doubt that he existed? No, because to doubt he must think, and to think he must exist. Cogito ergo sum, he wrote. I think, therefore I am. With this single phrase, Descartes moved the foundation of certainty from God to the individual mind. The thinking self became the starting point of knowledge. Again, this sounds simple. Its implications were explosive. If my own reason is the foundation of certainty, then my reason is supreme. not tradition, not authority, not revelation. Descartes didn't mean it this way. He was a devout Catholic, but he had handed humanity a philosophical crowbar to pry open every locked door. Before we go further, I need to ask you something. Where are you watching this from, and what time is it there? Are you a student staying up late for a history essay? A teacher gathering material? Someone who just loves ideas? Drop a comment. This channel exists because of curious minds like yours, and if you find value in what we do here at Professor Archive, if these deep dives into history help you see the world differently, consider leaving a super thanks. It genuinely helps us continue making content that treats your intelligence with respect. John Locke took Descartes' individualism and built a political philosophy on it. Writing in the aftermath of England's Glorious Revolution in 1688, Locke argued that humans are born as blank slates, tabula rasa. We're not born corrupted by original sin or stamped with innate social rank. We're born equal, and we learn everything from experience. This meant that education and environment shape who we become. If you wanted better people, you didn't pray for divine intervention. You created better conditions for learning and growth. More radically, Locke argued that government exists only by the consent of the governed, and its sole purpose is to protect natural rights, life, liberty, and property. If a government fails in this, the people have the right to replace it. These ideas, written in 1689, would echo in Philadelphia in 1776, when Thomas Jefferson wrote that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. But the Enlightenment wasn't just happening in dusty philosophy books, it was happening in coffee houses. The first coffee house opened in London in 1652, and by 1700 there were more than 2,000. These were radically democratic spaces. For the price of a cup of coffee, any man could sit and join conversations about politics, science, trade, and ideas. Rank didn't matter at the coffee house table. A merchant could debate a lord. A scientist could challenge a clergyman. Coffee itself, imported from the Islamic world, was part of this transformation. Unlike ale, which dulled the mind, coffee sharpened it. Europeans were literally becoming more sober, more alert, more capable of sustained rational thought. In France, the equivalent was the salon, and here's where the story gets interesting. Many of the most influential salons were run by women. Madame Geoffroy, Madame du Deffand, Julie de Lespinasse. These women couldn't attend universities, couldn't hold office, couldn't vote. But they shaped the Enlightenment by controlling the spaces where ideas were debated. They decided who spoke, who was heard, who gained influence. Voltaire, Rousseau, Diderot, all the great names, they performed in these salons, and the hostesses were their editors and publicists. This created a strange irony. The Enlightenment championed universal reason and natural rights, but most Enlightenment thinkers excluded women from these categories. Mary Wollstonecraft would call them out on this hypocrisy in 1792 with her Vindication of the Rights of Woman, asking, "If reason is universal, why do you deny it to half the human race?" Voltaire became the Enlightenment's greatest provocateur. Born François-Marie Arouet in 1694, he was imprisoned in the Bastille twice, beaten by a nobleman's servants, and exiled from France multiple times. But he wielded his pen like a weapon. In 1759, he published Candide, a savage satire of philosophical optimism. Its protagonist suffers every imaginable disaster, war, earthquake, disease, while his teacher, Dr. Pangloss, insists they live in the best of all possible worlds. Voltaire was attacking the complacent belief that God has arranged everything for the best. The book's conclusion, "We must cultivate our garden," became a call to practical action over abstract speculation. Voltaire also championed religious tolerance, famously writing, "I may disagree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." He didn't actually write those exact words, his biographer paraphrased him, but the sentiment captures his spirit. When a French Protestant named Jean Calas was tortured and executed on false charges in 1762, Voltaire spent 3 years fighting to clear his name, turning the case into a cause célèbre against religious fanaticism. Then there was the encyclopedia. Denis Diderot and Jean-Laurent d'Alembert began publishing it in 1751, intending to compile all human knowledge. This sounds straightforward until you realize what it meant. Knowledge wasn't secret, wasn't the property of guilds or priests. It was public, shareable, democratically available. The encyclopedia included everything from how to make pins to the nature of political liberty. The French government tried to suppress it, the church condemned it, but subscribers hungered for it. By the time the final volume appeared in 1772, 28 volumes had been produced, creating a monument to the idea that humanity could know everything worth knowing through reason alone. But not all Enlightenment thinkers agreed. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the most paradoxical figure of the era, argued that civilization had corrupted humanity's natural goodness. His discourse on inequality in 1755 claimed that the invention of property created all social evils. The first man who, having enclosed a piece of ground, took it into his head to say, "This is mine," and found people simple enough to believe him, was the real founder of civil society, he wrote. Rousseau believed humans were born free, but everywhere they were in chains, corrupted by society's artificial demands. His solution? A new form of social organization based on the general will, where people collectively determine their own laws. This sounds democratic, but it contained a terrifying seed. What if the individual disagrees with the general will? Rousseau's answer was chilling. They must be forced to be free. This idea would inspire both the French Revolution and, later, totalitarianism. Rousseau shows us that Enlightenment reason could lead to very different destinations. The Scottish Enlightenment took yet another path. David Hume, writing in Edinburgh, pushed empiricism to its logical extreme. If all knowledge comes from experience, he argued, we can never truly know causation. We see one billiard ball hit another and the second moves. But we don't actually observe causation, we observe sequence. Our belief in cause and effect is just habit, custom, not certain knowledge. This skeptical empiricism undermined not just religion but certainty itself. Hume also pioneered what we'd now call sociology, arguing that human nature is constant and can be studied scientifically. His friend Adam Smith applied this to economics, arguing in The Wealth of Nations in 1776 that free markets, guided by self-interest and the invisible hand, produce prosperity more effectively than government planning. Smith was describing a self-organizing system, markets as machines that run themselves according to natural laws. This was Newtonian physics applied to commerce. Across the Atlantic, Benjamin Franklin embodied Enlightenment practicality. He was a printer, scientist, inventor, diplomat, and philosopher who believed useful knowledge trumped abstract speculation. He proved that lightning was electricity in 1752 with his famous kite experiment, then immediately invented the lightning rod to protect buildings. He founded lending libraries, fire departments, hospitals, all practical institutions to improve communal life. When he helped draft the Declaration of Independence, he brought Enlightenment principles from theory into revolutionary action. The American Revolution was, in many ways, an Enlightenment project. The idea that people could rationally design their own government based on natural rights and consent. But here's where the story gets complicated. The Enlightenment championed universal reason and natural rights, yet most Enlightenment thinkers saw no contradiction in slavery. Thomas Jefferson wrote that all men are created equal while owning over 600 enslaved people. Locke invested in the slave trade. Hume made racist statements about Africans. Kant developed elaborate theories of racial hierarchy. How do we explain this? Some historians argue that Enlightenment universalism was always hypocritical, limited to European men. Others suggest that the very principles of Enlightenment reason contain the seeds of their own universalization, that once you declare all men have natural rights, you've created a standard that will eventually expand to include everyone. The abolition movement, after all, used Enlightenment arguments. So did feminism. So did anti-colonialism. Perhaps the Enlightenment was both a liberation and a new form of domination, and we're still working out which aspects to keep and which to reject. Immanuel Kant tried to synthesize the entire Enlightenment in Königsberg, Prussia. He rarely left his hometown, but his mind traveled to the edges of human understanding. In his critique of pure reason in 1781, he argued that we can't know things as they truly are, only as they appear to us, filtered through the structures of space, time, and causality that our minds impose. This was revolutionary. Our minds don't passively receive reality, they actively construct it. But Kant believed in moral universals. His categorical imperative stated, "Act only according to that maxim by which you can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law." In other words, if everyone did what you're doing, would the world function? This was ethics based on reason alone, no God required. When Kant wrote an essay titled, "What is Enlightenment?" in 1784, he answered, "Sapere aude, dare to know. Have courage to use your own understanding." This became the Enlightenment's motto. Think for yourself. The French Revolution in 1789 seemed like Enlightenment ideals in action. Reason overthrowing tradition, natural rights replacing divine right, the people seizing their own destiny. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen proclaimed liberty, equality, and fraternity. But the revolution devoured itself. By 1793, France was in the reign of terror. Thousands were guillotined, including many revolutionaries. Robespierre created a cult of reason, literally attempting to replace Christianity with rationalism, holding festivals in Notre Dame. When Robespierre himself was guillotined in 1794, many wondered, had Enlightenment reason led to chaos? Edmund Burke, watching from England, argued in his reflections on the revolution in France that abstract reason, untethered from tradition and custom, produces monsters. You can't rebuild society from scratch based on theory, he argued. Societies are complex, organic entities that grow over centuries. Tear them down, and you get blood. Yet the Enlightenment's ideas kept spreading. Napoleon, for all his autocracy, spread Enlightenment legal codes across Europe. The metric system, rational and decimal, replaced the chaotic medieval measurements. Legal equality before the law replaced feudal privileges. The idea that merit, not birth, should determine position became normalized. The Napoleonic Code was problematic, especially for women, but it was based on Enlightenment principles of clarity, rationality, and equality. Latin America's independence movements were explicitly Enlightenment projects. Simón Bolívar read of Voltaire and Rousseau. When he liberated South America from Spanish rule in the 1820s, he created republics based on Enlightenment constitutionalism. The same happened across the former Spanish Empire. These revolutions had their own contexts and complexities, but they consistently appealed to natural rights and popular sovereignty, ideas incubated in Enlightenment Europe. The Enlightenment rewired civilization's soul by changing what humans believed they were capable of knowing and doing. Before the Enlightenment, most people accepted that life was as it had always been and always would be. After the Enlightenment, progress became imaginable, then expected. The idea that conditions could improve, that knowledge could grow, that society could be redesigned, these became common sense. This shift was so profound that we barely notice it now. We assume that next year's technology will be better than this year's. We assume that medical knowledge will advance. We assume that social problems can be solved through rational policy. These assumptions are Enlightenment inheritances. But the Enlightenment also created new anxieties. If there's no divine plan, no cosmic order, then we're alone in an indifferent universe. Existence has no inherent meaning beyond what we create. This realization, liberating to some, was terrifying to others. The Romantic movement arose partly in response, emphasizing emotion, intuition, and the sublime mystery of nature over cold Enlightenment reason. Poets like William Blake attacked Newton's single vision, arguing that rationalism killed wonder. There's a tension here that we still feel. We want the benefits of reason, science, technology, progress, But we also want meaning, purpose, enchantment. The Enlightenment disenchanted the world, and we've been trying to re-enchant it ever since. The Enlightenment also created the modern concept of the individual. Medieval people primarily understood themselves as members of groups, a family, a guild, a parish, a estate. Your identity was your role. The Enlightenment said, you are an autonomous, rational agent. You have rights as an individual. You can make your own choices, pursue your own happiness, create your own meaning. This individualism has been enormously liberating, but it's also lonely. When you're not embedded in thick networks of obligation and identity, you're free but untethered. Modern alienation, the sense of being isolated in a crowd, is partly an Enlightenment legacy. Science became the Enlightenment's greatest success story. The scientific method produced astonishing results. Vaccines, engines, electricity, chemistry, eventually computers and space travel. The Enlightenment bet that reason could understand and control nature, and that bet paid off spectacularly. But it also produced a worldview where only what can be measured is real, where subjective experience is secondary to objective data. This has impoverished our understanding of consciousness, art, meaning, all the things that make life worth living but resist quantification. Political liberalism is an Enlightenment creation. The idea that government should protect individual rights, that power should be limited by law, that citizens should participate in their own governance, these weren't inevitable developments. They were argued into existence by Enlightenment thinkers and fought for by Enlightenment-inspired revolutionaries. Democracy as we know it, with universal suffrage and civil rights, took centuries longer, but it built on Enlightenment foundations. When Martin Luther King Jr. said he had a dream that people would be judged by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin, he was articulating an Enlightenment ideal that the Enlightenment itself failed to fully embrace. Education transformed. Before the Enlightenment, education meant memorizing classics and scripture. After the Enlightenment, education meant developing reason, learning to think critically, acquiring useful knowledge. The idea of public education, that every child should learn to read and reason, is an Enlightenment project. When you attend school, when you're taught to question assumptions and think for yourself, you're experiencing the Enlightenment's vision. The Enlightenment also secularized morality. For most of history, ethics meant obeying God's commands. The Enlightenment asked, can we be good without God? Can reason alone guide us to ethical behavior? Kant said yes. Utilitarians like Jeremy Bentham said yes, arguing that the right action is whatever produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number. This secularization has been both liberating and destabilizing. We're still arguing about where moral authority comes from, if not from the divine. Welcome to Professor Archive, by the way, where we don't just recount history. We explore how ideas that seem abstract and dusty actually built the world you're walking through right now. The Enlightenment isn't just something that happened to other people 300 years ago. It's the operating system of modernity, running quietly in the background of your assumptions about freedom, rights, progress, and truth. The dark side of the Enlightenment can't be ignored. Enlightenment reason was used to justify colonialism. Europeans told themselves they were bringing light to benighted peoples, civilization to savages. This civilizing mission, dripping with condescension and racism, caused immense suffering. The Enlightenment's confidence that European reason represented universal human reason was catastrophically wrong. It erased other ways of knowing, other forms of wisdom, other cultures' achievements. The Enlightenment's faith in progress also enabled the Industrial Revolution's brutalities. If progress is inevitable and good, then the suffering of workers in factories was just a temporary cost. The same rationality that designed efficient steam engines designed efficient systems of exploitation. Max Weber would later call this the iron cage of rationality, where rational systems become inhuman. The 20th century shook faith in Enlightenment progress. 2 world wars, totalitarian regimes, the Holocaust, these seemed to prove that reason could produce horror as easily as liberation. The Frankfurt School philosophers argued that Enlightenment reason, taken to its extreme, becomes instrumental rationality, treating humans as objects to be manipulated. Auschwitz was organized with terrible rationality. The atomic bomb was the fruit of scientific reason. Suddenly, Enlightenment optimism looked naive. Yet we didn't abandon Enlightenment ideals. Instead, we tried to complicate them, to add safeguards, to recognize that reason alone isn't enough. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 was an Enlightenment document, asserting that all humans have inherent dignity and rights. The civil rights movements, feminism, environmentalism, all used Enlightenment arguments about justice and equality while also critiquing Enlightenment limitations. Today, we live in a strange moment regarding the Enlightenment. On one hand, Enlightenment values, science, reason, individual rights, democracy, are more globally widespread than ever. On the other hand, they're under attack from multiple directions. Postmodernists question whether objective truth exists. Religious fundamentalists reject secular reason. Populists attack expertise and institutions. Conspiracy theories thrive in an information environment where everyone can be their own authority. Climate change denialism rejects scientific consensus. We're seeing what happens when Enlightenment ideals, think for yourself, question authority, become weaponized against Enlightenment institutions, science, universities, expert communities. Perhaps the Enlightenment's greatest gift was self-criticism. The Enlightenment taught us to question everything, including the Enlightenment itself. This is both its strength and its vulnerability. A system built on critical reason can't claim absolute authority without contradicting itself. This makes it fragile but also adaptable. We can update Enlightenment ideals to include those it excluded. We can recognize its cultural limitations while preserving its best insights. The soul of civilization that the Enlightenment rewired isn't finished. We're still working out the implications. We're still arguing about how to balance individual rights with community obligations, how to reconcile scientific knowledge with human meaning, how to use reason without becoming cold, how to preserve tradition without stifling progress. These are Enlightenment problems, and we solve them with Enlightenment tools: debate, evidence, reason, experimentation. What profession do you have? Are you a teacher showing this to students? A scientist who sees the scientific method's lineage? A philosopher wrestling with these questions professionally? Someone in a completely unrelated field who just finds this fascinating? Your perspective matters because the Enlightenment was always about conversation, about diverse minds engaging ideas together. So did the Enlightenment rewire civilization's soul? Absolutely. It replaced divine authority with human reason as the primary source of knowledge. It replaced inherited hierarchy with individual rights as the basis of political legitimacy. It replaced cyclical time with progressive time, making improvement imaginable. It replaced fate with agency, making choice possible. These changes are so fundamental that we inhabit them like fish inhabit water, barely noticing the medium that makes our existence possible. But rewiring isn't the same as perfecting. The circuits the Enlightenment installed sometimes short out. Reason can become rationalization. Science can become scientism. Individual rights can become atomized selfishness. Progress can become destructive growth. The Enlightenment gave us tools, but tools can be used well or badly. Perhaps the deepest way the Enlightenment changed us is this: it made us responsible. When God or fate determined everything, you weren't responsible for large-scale outcomes. You did your duty in your station, and the cosmic order took care of the rest. The Enlightenment said, you can understand the world, you can change it, therefore you're responsible for it. This is empowering and terrifying. We can't blame the gods anymore. We can't say the social order is natural and unchangeable. We know better. We know that humans create institutions, laws, economies, cultures, which means we can create better ones, which means we should.